Welcome everyone to our panel discussion, Progress and Promise, Treatment and Trends Update for People with Lupus. I am Shanelle Gabriel. I'm a singer, poet, lyricist, advocate for lupus awareness, and I'm a person living with lupus. From getting diagnosed to understanding available treatment options and establishing a healthcare approach that works best for you, it can be a process that might feel overwhelming at times. We know that lupus is a heterogeneous disease, meaning it can differ from person to person. The LRA, its clinical research affiliate, Lupus Therapeutics, and the lupus research community are determined to turn the thing that has confounded scientists about lupus into new treatments and one day, a cure. So today we want to help bring some ease in navigating that journey with a discussion about current treatment options available and updates on those on the horizon. Joining us today are an esteemed panel of lupus experts. Dr. Anca Askanase is the professor of medicine, founder and director of the Lupus Center, and director of Rheumatology Trials at Columbia University. Next, we have Dr. Stacy Bell. Dr. Stacy Bell is the Executive Vice President of Lupus Therapeutics, the clinical research affiliate of the Lupus Research Alliance. Also on our panel today is Dr. Elena Hsieh, Associate Professor of Immunology and Microbiology and Pediatrics, Section of Allergy and Immunology at the University of Colorado School of Medicine, Children's Hospital, Colorado. Dr. Hsieh received the LRA's most recent Global Team Science Award, and she and her team are working to identify what causes lupus nephritis in children to improve its diagnosis and treatment. Dr. Askanase, for those who might be newly diagnosed, as well as those who might be wondering about some of the more recently approved therapies, and given the heterogeneity of the disease, can you please give us an overview of what treatment options are now available?
Thank you for the kind introduction. So when thinking about lupus and how to treat it, one has to think how severe is lupus affecting the person. Someone might have mild symptoms, someone might have severe symptoms, and the treatment needs to be tailored to the severity of the symptoms, but also to the area of the body that's under attack. It's just the way we think about the best treatment options for each part of the body is a little different. Now, there are some ground rules. Well, the ground rule number one is that hydroxychloroquine has been proven to lower disease activity, to prevent flares, to decrease some of the comorbidities, and actually prolong life for people with lupus. So hydroxychloroquine is one of the medications that is thought to actually be disease modifying in lupus. So everybody that has a diagnosis of lupus, unless they have a major contraindication, should be taking hydroxychloroquine. Now, the next step in treating a person with lupus is adding some steroids, prednisone, methylprednisolone. Now, that has worked extraordinarily well, as we've learned that steroids are a big part of the treatment of lupus some 7 decades ago. The guidelines from the European Association of Rheumatologists, and hopefully the ones that are in preparation from the American College of Rheumatologists, will shed some light about how we should think about decreasing the amount of steroids we treat lupus with. So stay tuned. We all hope that there will be one day when treatments for lupus will rely very little, or maybe not at all, on steroids. So what is the something else? Traditionally, the something else was sort of number 3, with hydroxychloroquine number 1, prednisone number 2, and then number 3, immunosuppressants. Those are mycophenolate mofetil, azathioprine, methotrexate, sometimes for more severe disease, cyclophosphamide, and the calcineurin inhibitors. In the realm of calcineurin inhibitors, there's a new therapeutic development, voclosporin, a calcineurin inhibitor that is now approved for the treatment of lupus nephritis, of kidney lupus. Last in this sort of stepwise approach to how to treat lupus is the novel biologic treatments the first biologic that was approved for the treatment of lupus was belimumab, and that was approved in 2011. Between 2011 and 2020, when the same belimumab was approved for the treatment of lupus nephritis, we had a little bit of a desert. A lot of attempts, but we have not been able to bring a novel therapy to lupus. And more recently, in 2021, anifrolumab, an anti-interferon treatment, the second biologic to be approved for the treatment of lupus, has been available for the treatment of people with lupus.
And just for clarity, when you say biologics, that's these are just the ones that specifically target lupus itself.
They're targeted treatments for lupus that mimic naturally occurring molecules. Benlysta is an anti-BAFF. It's an antibody directed against a protein that is important in how lupus happens. Anifrolumab is a receptor blocker for another big protein in lupus, interferon.
That's really helpful to know, because I know we're talking about medication, but also talking about the differences within that I know that people with lupus are curious as to what that is. But thank you so much for sharing all the range of therapies that are available. That's really uplifting to hear about some of these newer developments, and that there are things that are being developed and have been developed over the last few years. I'm gonna pass the mic over to you, Dr. Hsieh. Now, you work with children living with lupus. Now, is there anything that you commonly hear from children and parents, questions they ask, or anything you think is specifically or especially important for them to know as it relates to the approach to treatment of children?
There are three things that come to mind that I get commonly asked as someone who works with children that have lupus and their families. So I want to take a minute to talk a little bit about genetics in lupus, because we get asked that question a lot, particularly in pediatrics. And I do think it's important because it actually does factor in the approach for therapy. And I will kind of separate the genetics conversation into two big piles. I think there is genetics on how typically most people will think about genetics, as in, well, it's something that runs in the family. So then if you have a family member that has that, you have increased likelihood that you will have that as well. I think that's definitely a category that is true for lupus as well. For example, if you have a family where, there's a lot of family members that have asthma, nobody will be surprised if you have a child that then have asthma as well. But it's a chance. It's like the same thing also with type 1 diabetes. And you would say, well, if I have someone with type 1 diabetes, it doesn't mean that your child is going to have it for sure. It just means that there's increased chances, increased likelihood because you have a family history. So there's a risk factor, there's something in your genes, it runs in the family per se. However, and in those situations, my discussion with the families are usually is lupus is multifactorial. Definitely your genes matter, as it matters really in any sort of like human disease, but it is not the thing for most of the cases where if one family member has it, then the child will have it for sure, or the sibling will have it for sure. There's another category that we call monogenic lupus, meaning that there is a different substitution. So if you think about genetic code, and that's lots of letters in a book, it means that there is a letter substitution or several letter substitution in gene, and then that actually can explain the entire picture of lupus. And just having that one difference in the one gene can explain the entire picture of lupus, and that's called monogenic, meaning single gene. So in that scenario, then it is actually beyond the sort of runs in your family risk factor. That actually, you're talking about a pattern of inheritance where we have words that we use like dominant and recessive. And there are some genes where if there's a change, then that means that there's 25% chance, 50% chance that the next sibling might have it. And actually, we do have hard numbers for that. But that's a very, very a small percentage of scenarios of children with lupus. Now, why that matters? Because if I hear a story about the age of onset, the sex, the constellation of symptoms, we might actually go after genetic testing for that child and the family. And that matters in the context of management. The other thing also is that if we do identify that one gene that is, quote, responsible for the whole picture, there might be a treatment for that immunological pathway. We don't have targets. We don't have drugs for every single one pathway affected, but we do have it for some. So if we do that genetic analysis and it pans out in that scenario, it makes a big difference because we're not dealing with, we try this first, this fails, then we try the next and this fails. We actually have something to, quote, go after. The second thing that I get a lot of questions about families is actually about nutrition. Adults, quote, they take care of their own nutrition. In families, a little different, right? So I get lots of questions for parents who say, what can I do in the context of nutrition to be able to, basically support my child, right? Like, what can I do to make their immune system better? So my typical response to that is, there's a lot of research ongoing at this moment in time. I can't really tell you it's good for you to do a probiotic every day. It's good for you to have this kind of diet every day. But there is a lot of good, exciting research. And I do think that there will be large site studies that are actually focused on this very specific question. So it is an important one for which I think we can have hope that we'll have more answers in the future. And then the last sort of thing that I'll address in this that I see is the third category for which there tend to be a lot of questions around that is about future, basically adulthood having support for sort of the teenage years in terms of, a lot of these medications, particularly steroids, they can cause physical changes, and it is difficult enough, right, we all recall what it is to be in middle school, in high school, and go through your teenage years. And this just adds an additional layer that makes it hard to discuss with peers. So I have a lot of conversations about support around the teenage years in terms of mental health and support for the parents, because a lot of these children also have siblings. And I have a lot of conversations with the patients themselves about, this is very difficult for you. Let's talk about support for you, but actually let's talk about support for the whole family. Because sometimes the siblings feel a little bit, quote, less special because they don't get that much attention. We could argue that attention is good or bad, but the attention is there and not there for the other siblings. And I actually have a lot of conversations with my patients about thinking about these things. So I will end it with that.
Well, that's so helpful. I mean, talking about the genetics part of it, I think that's all of our questions, even those that are not pediatric. We're thinking as an adult, like, if I have children, is this something that's passed on? And I'm the first generation in my family to have lupus. So this is definitely helpful. And those questions around nutrition, I think, are also questions we all ask too. So Thank you so much for that. I know that there are a lot of parents and young people, Dr. Hsieh, that will find that really, really helpful. Now, to keep this conversation going, so much progress has been made over the past few years. We've seen a tremendous increase in the number of potential new drugs and new treatments on the drug pipeline in development. CAR T cell therapy is among the most exciting in development now. Now, the LRA funded initial research early in this area. So, Stacy, can you please share what's promising on the horizon with treatments, including CAR T?
I'd be happy to, Shanelle. Thank you so very much. And it's my great pleasure to share the time with you today, along with Dr. Askanase and Dr. Hsieh, two of really our biggest, most passionate, thoughtful champions for our lupus community. So thank you very much. So it's an exciting time. I think on a day-to-day basis when someone is having their lived experience with lupus, and as you mentioned, it's different for everyone, it's very easy to lose hope. And I think that when you think about over the years and the number of treatment options, Dr. Askanase mentioned kind of the desert for a bit of time, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But despite, times when individuals may feel that they don't have something to be hopeful for, or that there's nothing on the horizon for them, we're truly at a time right now that there are a number of treatments available, but also a number of treatments on the horizon. Lupus Therapeutics is currently partnering with dozens of pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies, as well as academic institutions, on clinical trials and clinical research overall. And this is really being done through our network of investigators, LUCIN. And this network really comes together to not only be a network of clinical trial sites, but to be a community and to really have this collaboration and group thinking to approach these challenging problems, address lupus as a heterogeneous disease, and then really hopefully work together toward bringing treatments to our community. Right now, Lupus Therapeutics is embarking on a number of later phase studies. When you think about clinical research and development, the potential treatments move first into humans after having a lot of their preclinical testing done in the laboratory or in experiments with animals, and then it moves into humans. And as it moves along the phases of clinical trial development, as we get closer to phase 3 and then ultimately hopefully approval, it's really important to be looking at those therapies that are coming in that direction. So within our later phase studies right now, we have a variety of different options going forward that have different mechanisms of action or different targets within the cell or within the body to potentially provide benefit, and then different modes of administration. In addition, we have studies that are evaluating systemic lupus, but also looking at these different facets or the different manifestations or presentations of the disease. So skin or cutaneous lupus, looking at lupus nephritis, which we've talked a bit about, and even a lot of discussion about lupus arthritis and other aspects that are impacting individuals. We have a study ongoing right now for neuropsychiatric lupus, because obviously the mental health aspects of lupus are tremendous as well, and very impactful for those living with lupus. And then you touched on it already, but I would be remiss if I didn't say the explosion and the excitement surrounding cellular therapies right now as potential curative therapies for those living with lupus. There truly has been a tremendous shift in organizations looking at the potential approach of CAR T therapies. And really there's different cellular therapies, and we can go into details about the different modalities of them. But in most cases, cells are actually taken from an individual living with lupus outside of their body. They're modified and re-administered to the individual living with lupus, so that those cells now go in and actually attack components that are related to lupus itself. There are other approaches to this where there's actually cells modified outside of the individual and then given to the person. There have been some tremendous preliminary data. There was a paper published in November of this past year from Dr. Hsieh and his team in Germany. The results to date look phenomenal. But I think we need to keep in mind this is with a small number of individuals, and there's still a lot to be evaluated kind of in the long-term setting. And then also, again, which of these approaches is going to be most effective and allow the individual to have the least amount of impact. It's also having those treatments accessible and affordable for individuals. And so there are a number of institutions and individuals working on just those elements of it, so that we can, if we do have a curative treatment like this that has such potential, that we can, really provide that to our entire community. And I'm really excited to say, one of the things within the context of the Lupus Research Alliance overall organizational strategic plan is to really focus on the heterogeneity and the understanding of the disease. And that really becomes very important when you're talking about these types of curative treatments and looking at kind of what the longer term outcomes of those are. LRA continues to fund, they funded the preliminary research on CAR T therapy, and they continue to push the envelope to try to find what that next best therapy is, so we don't have these prolonged deserts. And, I think that there's a lot of promising things on the horizon. The final thing I'll say beyond new therapies, and you can have as many innovative scientists and brilliant doctors and champions, like Dr. Hsieh and Dr. Askanase, fighting for these new treatments, but we really need individuals to be participating in clinical research. Not only is the disease heterogeneous, but our community is so diverse. And so whether that's race or ethnicity or gender or age or geographic location, we really need individuals impacted by lupus to participate in clinical research to really be successful in developing new therapies. So with that being said, myself at Lupus Therapeutics and more globally at Lupus Research Alliance, we're here to answer any questions, take any feedback. Just know that we're here fighting for those new treatments to be available.
No, thank you so much, Stacey. There is a lot to be excited and encouraged about with everything that you shared, from the new therapies and the work that you all are doing at Lupus Therapeutics, as well as the potential treatments that are coming down the line. Thank you for sharing that. And so now this is a question for the whole panel. Is there anything else you think is helpful for people to know related to treatment or potential treatments? Dr. Askanase, can we start with you?
Absolutely. So I think that thinking about new treatments, I think that we owe the debt of gratitude to the people that participated in these trials, that allow for these major discoveries to come to fruition, and that these new treatments are now available for people living with lupus everywhere. But I want to submit to everyone listening today that we need to think about clinical trials as part of the treatment algorithm for lupus, as one would do if they had a cancer, right? Cancer, everybody wants to be in a research protocol, in a research study, because that's the best science there is. And I hope there will be a day when lupus patients will feel the same. I want to be in a study. Please, that's the best care. This is how I'm going to get the best treatment. This is how I'm going to get better. So I hope that, as we all are better at figuring out the right treatment for the right person, the right patient for the right study, I think that there will be a lot more enthusiasm from the doctors, from the lupus patients, from the whole lupus community to having clinical trials as part of clinical care for lupus.
It's so encouraging to hear you all talk about clinical trials, because especially because I was in one. I participated in one, and I don't think we know enough about them. We don't talk enough about the process of the clinical trial. And for me, it was really helpful to have extra doctors working with me, to have the potential to have better therapies as I was on something that was new and novel, but also, to know that if for some reason it didn't work out, I could say no, I could leave. I think a lot of times we think we're signing our life away. And I think that that's part of the hesitancy that we see as patients, so knowing that we have advocates with us, these extra doctors, they're still working with our doctor. That was all really helpful for me to decide why I wanted to be a part of the clinical trial. And I felt very empowered in the process. So thank you for the work that you all are doing around research. It's super important and helpful. Dr. Hsieh, is there anything that you think could be helpful, just for a patient, maybe not necessarily research or treatment, but what do you think might be some really good advice for someone who might be newly diagnosed, thinking about living, what it's like to live with this illness, with this disease?
There's a couple of things I would like to say, and one is to really support the statements that have been made around the participation in trials and thinking about trial as like this is kind of part of therapy and care. I think there's even more concern, right, for various sort of right reasons about a parent thinking about their child participating in a trial. That can be a scary thing to think about. But I come back to the idea of there's a lot of hope for these trials to be really fruitful. And because we just heard about CAR T therapy, there was a study that was published that was in Germany in November 2022, but there's a lot of ongoing trials here. And I want to share my personal experience with this is actually already in press. We had our patient who we care for at our hospital in the pediatric age. And then she turned 18 and she just underwent CAR T therapy, and it is in precious 28 days post. And really for the first time in her life, in the past like 10 years that we've known her, she is essentially off therapy, having a SLEDA score that's like very close to like nothing, and just smiling, right? Like I cannot put into words really what that's like. And I just want to say, I want to see that 1,000 times more, right? I want to see the mom who is like smiling when she sees me, and the patient who smiles. And that's what I want to say. And I want to say that there's a lot of hope for that. And I'm super excited to have the opportunity to be a physician, a scientist in this time when that actually could happen. And I could see lots of smiles. So lots and lots of hope for that. And I think I will end it there.
Thank you so much. And please close us out. Stacey, is there anything, I think we got a lot of clinical trial conversation, but is there anything that you think would also be helpful just for somebody that's newly diagnosed or somebody that's living with lupus?
Yeah, for sure. And if Dr. Hsieh's comments didn't bring chills to everyone, they should, right? Because it's remarkable. The final thing that I'll say really relates back to those living with lupus on a day-to-day basis. And I'll implore you to be your best advocate, your family to be your best advocate. You talk to your providers, ask them questions about trials. Even if your provider doesn't have experience per se, there's so many individuals out there that do, that your provider could partner with. There's so many resources available, through the Lupus Research Alliance, Lupus Therapeutics, information about trials, but also ways that you can speak to your provider about it. Any hesitations that you have, there are programs where you can speak to a peer, someone that, like Shanelle, who's participated in a study, where they can share their experience so that it will provide you a sense of comfort and trust in trying some of these things. So, know that you're not alone. Know that there's many others here to support you, and that there is a path forward for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Those are some great points, Stacey. Thank you. And you mentioned this idea of advocating for yourself. And yes, definitely when it comes to new treatments and all these options, but also just being able to know that you belong in the conversation with what happens to your body. And I think that that's something that people living with lupus or any chronic illness struggle with, is we think that doctors are the only experts in the room, and we are our best expert on our body, at least to be able to say, these are what's going on. I know for myself, I make sure I keep a journal of my symptoms, and that's something that I'll bring with me to doctor's appointments, and maybe that leads to new ideas around what we need to do moving forward. But very much just being encouraged and knowing that there while it feels like sometimes we can be really helpless, like we can't control everything, just kind of holding on to the things that we do have control on is definitely helpful, and that's our conversations with our doctors. All right. And so we've discussed current potential treatments, and we know that there are more options available in recent years, which is very encouraging. But we also need to continue to find more personalized and better treatments for people living with lupus. I think we're at a turning point where we truly do need everyone to be a part of the solution to accelerate lupus treatment options. Stacey, I think we've talked about this, but what are some of the community-based health equity initiatives that the LRA and that Lupus Therapies are leading the charge on, that are bringing the voices of all people with lupus to the discussion and have the potential to improve drug development process?
Yeah, so it's really multifaceted. I mentioned briefly about speaking to peers that may have already participated in clinical studies. We have our PALS program, our Patient Advocates for Lupus Studies, where we're able to have individuals that have participated in clinical trials work on early education for individuals that may want to participate in clinical studies, as well as a new program that we're piloting called the Trial Buddy Program, where as an individual is going through the clinical trial, they actually have someone else that they can share their experiences with, ask questions, and really become more comfortable in speaking to their providers or those that are administering the trial to them. Overall, we have a number of other patient engagement activities ongoing, whether that be through educational materials, as I mentioned, some educational events such as webinars. We're going to be embarking on more of these types of programs in partnership with our communications team to really build on all of the great things that they've offered to the patient community in the past. In addition to that, one of the things that we're very fortunate with Lupus Therapeutics is to have oversight of our health equity branch of the LRA. So we really are holding up the lens for the whole organization to look at health equity as a consideration. And again, that goes back to the diversity within our clinical studies, but it also goes back to the diversity of our providers and our researchers, and really making everyone aware of the things that are available to them, and really broadening the access and the availability of those things within communities. So we have an inaugural program that we're piloting called Project Change, and it really is doing community-based efforts to bring information and participation and accessibility for clinical trials and information to the community. So we have 3 of our centers within our Lucid network where we're piloting information programs where we're engaging with the community, and that may be at faith-based centers, it may be with public health offices, it may be with other partner organizations that support lupus or individuals living with autoimmune conditions, bringing them all together to really say, okay, how best can we make these resources and clinical trials available within these communities, initially in our Black population, but going beyond that to other races and ethnicities, and really again going into other demographics, whether that be age or the rural community or different socioeconomic strata. And so I think that it's something to be extremely excited about. Again, in addition to that, pivotal program, we also have a number of other activities where we are conducting or participating in webinars about clinical trial diversity. We are trying to educate within our own staff and community, taking sections of our community meeting where we're pulling a lot of investigators and researchers and those living with lupus together and saying, how can we do better? And we'll continue to try to really strive to improve upon those elements, that the offerings that the Lupus Research Alliance has, but really as a community, how we band together to provide those services to everyone.
No, that is awesome. Thank you so much, Stacey, for sharing that. And truth be told, everyone on this panel has given us, we have a lot to be uplifted about with the great promise of research, discovery, and drug development. It is also important to know that our entire community really has helped in leading to these breakthroughs that we've seen, whether it's through educating others about lupus, advocating, fundraising, doing those walks, or participating in the clinical research process. It truly does take all of us working together. And there are many ways you watching at home can be a part of it. So for more information, you can visit the Lupus Research Alliance and Lupus Therapeutics websites, and make sure to check out our social media. This was an amazing event, and I just feel really inspired to share a poem with you all just to close out and to give some encouragement to my fellow lupus warriors. You think you own me. Squeezed my life in your palms, taking over my body. You think you are me, lupus. You think because you've hijacked this vessel that you're captain, you think you can get away with mutiny, but see, I'm still the same me, the same beautiful butterfly floating on the breeze. I ain't scared to wrestle the wind, to battle Reynard's thorns, not afraid to diss this disease, to find peace, be at ease with this disease. I miss my old life, but I'm fashioning a new one with this disease, and in no way am I saying this is easy. The way my cells fight themselves, my chest being in a cage of pleurisy, my scalp crying strands of my hair, that the pain in my knees that interfere with my prayers makes it hard to sometimes find the joy in life. makes the sun less bright, but I know no matter what that there is nothing that will take away my fight when it seems to make my day feel like night. I'll still reach for a star when it seems my world spins left. I resolve to force it to revolve right. And even if my limbs refuse to move, my spirit will still dance. And every day I'm going to choose to enhance this universe with my presence in any way that I can. Grateful to those who support me, love me. I know that lupus is not me, but it's the spark that created a flame. My illness is not me, but it's the source of my vanity. Lupus, you can't damage me, because my body isn't all I possess. I still have a purpose, a reason to smile. I'm still living my life with no regrets. On behalf of our panel, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. For more information, you can visit the Lupus Research Alliance and Lupus Therapeutics websites, and make sure to check out our social media. Take care.